It's a miracle that I was able to come back here. I would never thought, I'd never even dreamt that I'd be able to come back here.
I devoutly hope that we will never again have to see such scenes.
The beaches of Normandy tell a story of unimaginable bravery, but there's a darker side few ever speak about. Thousands of soldiers lost their lives, but what happened to their bodies after the battle is rarely discussed. Beneath the glory and triumph lies a haunting chapter of history. Have you ever wondered how the remains of those who fell were handled, or why this part of D-Day's legacy remains largely untold? Join us as we uncover the terrifying truth that they never told you about what happened to the dead bodies on D-Day. D-Day, the Normandy Invasion. The Normandy landings on June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, were the largest seaborne invasion in history, marking the start of the Allied push to liberate France and the rest of Western Europe during World War II. Codenamed Operation Neptune, the landings were part of the larger Operation Overlord, which would prove decisive in shifting the balance of power in the war. The success of D-Day laid the groundwork for the Allied victory on the Western Front, beginning a relentless march toward defeating Nazi Germany. Planning for this monumental invasion began in 1943, with a focus not only on military strategy, but also on deception. A key element of the plan was Operation Bodyguard, an elaborate scheme designed to confuse the German forces about where and when the attack would occur. This strategy was coordinated by the London Controlling Section, a department of the British War Cabinet, which developed a draft plan called Plan Jael. The plan was presented at the Tehran Conference in November 1944 and approved in December, despite early skepticism due to the failure of earlier deception efforts. Operation Bodyguard aimed to mislead the German High Command, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, making them believe the Allied invasion would occur later than planned and at different locations. The Germans were led to expect attacks in areas such as Pas-de-Calais, southern France, the Balkans, and even Norway. By spreading their forces thin and away from Normandy, the Allies sought to weaken German defenses when the invasion occurred. One of the key aspects of the plan was to mask the massive buildup of Allied troops in southern England, diverting attention through other operations and focusing on air raids across Europe. When planning the D-Day invasion, Allied military leaders knew that the number of casualties would be shockingly high. Yet, despite this grim reality, they understood it was a sacrifice they had to make to establish a strong foothold in France. As the Allies prepared for the landings, Adolf Hitler appointed Field Marshal Erwin Rommel to lead the German defenses, including the construction of fortifications along the Atlantic Wall. Rommel, a respected military leader, anticipated an invasion but remained uncertain about its exact location due to the success of Operation Bodyguard. On the Allied side, US President Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed Major General Dwight D. Eisenhower as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, entrusting him with the monumental task of leading the invasion. D-Day is often seen as the turning point in World War II, the moment when the tide shifted in favor of the Allies. The Nazis were deeply entrenched across Europe, and a second front was desperately needed to help bring the war to an end. The dawn of destiny. At the break of dawn on June 6, 1944, the world witnessed the largest amphibious assault in military history, an operation that would become forever etched in the annals of World War II. The scale of the operation was staggering. Over 5,000 ships and landing craft carried nearly 156 soldiers across the English Channel toward the heavily fortified beaches of Normandy. The Allied forces were a multinational coalition, including troops from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and several other countries. The success of this operation was critical for the future of Europe. Hours before the infantry assault began, paratroopers from the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, along with British and Canadian paratroopers, were dropped behind enemy lines under the cover of darkness. Their mission was crucial. They were tasked with securing key bridges, roads, and other vital points to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. However, the mission did not go as planned. Many paratroopers were dropped miles from their intended drop zones, scattered across the French countryside in the dark of night. The chaos of these misdrops left small groups of paratroopers isolated, often behind enemy lines, with little support. But what could have spelled disaster instead became an advantage. Using their training and the element of surprise, these scattered units adapted quickly. They disrupted German communications, launched ambushes on patrols, and created confusion behind the German defensive lines. The Germans, uncertain of where the main attack would come, were left scrambling to mount an effective defense. As the first light of dawn spread across the horizon, the thunderous roar of Allied naval guns erupted. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers opened fire on German fortifications along the coast, unleashing a torrent of shells aimed at softening the defenses. The bombardment was relentless, sending explosions rippling along the coastline in a bid to clear the way for the thousands of soldiers who were about to land. By 6:30 a.m., the first waves of troops hit the beaches. The invasion was divided into 5 main landing zones, each with a designated codename: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Utah Beach, where the American 4th Infantry Division landed, saw relatively light resistance, largely due to the efforts of paratroopers who had inadvertently cleared key defenses before the main force arrived. However, the story was far more brutal at Omaha Beach, just to the east. Omaha Beach became the bloodiest battleground of D-Day. Here, the American 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions faced the full might of the entrenched German 352nd Infantry Division. The beach was littered with deadly obstacles: mines, barbed wire, and machine gun nests dug into the cliffs overlooking the shoreline. As the landing craft opened their ramps, the soldiers were immediately met with a storm of bullets, mortar fire, and artillery shells. The casualties were catastrophic, with many men cut down before they even reached the sand. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the American troops at Omaha displayed remarkable courage and tenacity. Slowly, through sheer determination and at great personal cost, they began to break through the German defenses. Small units pushed forward, clearing bunkers and machine gun nests, while reinforcements continued to pour in from the sea. Inch by inch, they clawed their way off the beach and toward the high ground. Further to the east, British and Canadian forces were storming Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. The landings here were met with fierce resistance, but the coordination between air, sea, and land forces allowed them to make significant progress. At Juno Beach, the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division encountered stiff opposition, but fought their way inland, securing vital positions. The British 50th Infantry Division on Gold Beach faced moderate resistance from German forces. They quickly adapted to the challenges on the ground. Their mission was crucial: to secure key objectives and advance inland. By the end of the day, they had linked up with Canadian forces from Juno Beach, forming a solid front against the enemy. This was no small feat, as every inch gained meant overcoming bunkers, machine gun nests, and artillery positions. The Canadian 3rd Infantry Division, landing at Juno Beach, faced similar challenges. The strong German defenses and treacherous beach terrain made every step forward a struggle. Despite facing intense enemy fire and difficult conditions, the Canadians fought with incredible tenacity. Their objective was to penetrate deeper into enemy-held territory, and by the day's end, they had made significant progress. Their determination not only secured Juno Beach, but also allowed them to join forces with the British, strengthening the Allied position along the Normandy coast. Meanwhile, at Sword Beach, the British 3rd Infantry Division faced perhaps the stiffest resistance of the day. German defenses were well prepared, with obstacles, mines, and strong points in place to thwart any invasion attempt. However, the British had an ace up their sleeve: specialized tanks known as Hobart's Funnies. These armored vehicles were designed to clear mines, break through beach obstacles, and create safe paths for the infantry. The Funnies played a pivotal role in clearing the way for the British soldiers, enabling them to push forward despite the heavy resistance. By midday, Sword Beach was secured, and British forces were moving inland toward their objective of capturing Caen. Above the beaches, the roar of aircraft filled the skies. The Allies had achieved air superiority, a crucial element in the success of the invasion. Bombers and fighters flew numerous missions throughout the day, targeting German defenses, supply lines, and reinforcements. Their presence provided much-needed support to the troops on the ground. Every bomb that fell and every strafing run helped ease the pressure on the advancing soldiers below, weakening the German positions that had been prepared for months. Despite the chaos and confusion that are inevitable in such a massive operation, the Allies managed to secure a foothold along the Normandy coast by the end of the day. It wasn't easy, and the cost was incredibly high. Thousands of soldiers were killed or wounded in the first hours of the invasion, paying the ultimate price for freedom. The bravery displayed on those beaches was unparalleled, and the determination of the men who fought there was unwavering. As the day drew to a close and the sun began to set over the now blood-stained sands of Normandy, the enormity of the day's achievements began to sink in. What had been accomplished in a few short hours would alter the course of history. The soldiers, many of whom were young and inexperienced, had faced unimaginable horrors on those beaches. They had watched their friends fall, endured enemy fire, and navigated treacherous terrain, all under the constant threat of death. Yet, they had risen to the challenge. The success of D-Day was not just in the landings themselves, but in the resolve shown by the men who fought. Their efforts on that first day paved the way for the eventual liberation of France and the collapse of Nazi Germany. The beachheads established at Gold, Juno, and Sword were just the beginning, but they were the foundation on which the Allied victory in Western Europe would be built. By nightfall, the Allies had managed to breach Hitler's Atlantic Wall. They had not yet won the war, but the events of June 6, 1944, marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Just 2 days after the invasion, on June 8, 1944, the first Allied cemetery in Europe was established to honor those who had fallen. Since then, military officials and memorial organizations have worked tirelessly to compile an accurate count of D-Day casualties. The National D-Day Memorial Foundation has played a key role in this effort. At the memorial in Bedford, Virginia, the names of 4,414 Allied soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Coast Guardsmen who died on D-Day are immortalized on bronze plaques. Librarian and genealogist Carol Tuckwiller spent years researching the exact number of casualties from that fateful day, a number that stands as the most reliable tally of those who perished during the 24-hour battle. German losses on D-Day are estimated to be between 4,000 and 9,000, with the Allies capturing 200,000 German soldiers as prisoners of war in the following days. The chaotic nature of the landings made it difficult for commanders to accurately document when many soldiers died. While hundreds more would fall in the Normandy campaign, the exact moment of their deaths often went unrecorded in the confusion of battle. For the commanders, the focus was on victory, not record-keeping, but their sacrifices are remembered nonetheless. Counting the fallen. Getting an accurate count of the casualties from D-Day is far more complicated than it might seem. As the largest seaborne invasion in history, the Normandy landings brought together over 150,000 soldiers from various Allied nations to storm the heavily fortified beaches of Nazi-occupied France. The numbers are staggering, and the stories of bravery and sacrifice are endless, but pinpointing the exact number of soldiers who perished that day remains elusive. In the lead-up to D-Day, military advisors and planners faced the daunting task of estimating how many soldiers would survive the operation. The estimates were grim. It was expected that the paratroopers, dropped behind enemy lines to secure key positions, would face a staggering 75% mortality rate. Even for the soldiers landing on the beaches, the predictions were harrowing, with many warning that the majority of the Allied troops involved might not make it through the day. These dire forecasts reflected the brutal reality of what lay ahead. Heavily fortified German defenses, machine gun nests, artillery, and obstacles designed to make any approach nearly impossible. As thousands of soldiers from both Allied and Axis forces clashed in the chaos of battle, keeping precise records of deaths became nearly impossible. Soldiers were often separated from their original units, making it hard to track who had died and where. Some soldiers ended up far from where they had initially landed, while others were lost in the fierce fighting along the beaches and inland. In the confusion, many bodies went unaccounted for, and the number of casualties became a matter of estimates rather than precise records. The fog of war made it difficult for historians to arrive at a definitive figure. Initial estimates of Allied losses on D-Day ranged from 5,000 to 12,000, a massive variance that reflected the difficulty in tracking deaths during such a chaotic and large-scale operation. Amid this uncertainty, a librarian and genealogist named Carol Tuckwiller dedicated years of her life to meticulously researching D-Day casualties. Working for the National D-Day Memorial Foundation in Bedford, Virginia, Tuckwiller made it her mission to give each fallen soldier a name and a story. Her extensive research culminated in the most precise tally of Allied casualties during D-Day. 4,414 Allied soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Coast Guardsmen lost their lives. Of these, around 2,000 were US soldiers, 2,000 were British, and about 340 were Canadian. Tuckwiller began her meticulous work at the Normandy American Cemetery, starting by marking June 6, 1944, as the death date on every grave of soldiers who perished during the D-Day landings. She pieced together information from after-action reports and the remnants of military records, though many records had been lost in a fire during the 1970s. What she found was that the US military would officially declare a soldier dead if he had been missing for a full year. As a result, many soldiers who disappeared on D-Day were formally declared dead exactly 1 year later, on June 7, 1945. However, Tuckwiller couldn't simply add all military personnel with a death date of June 7, 1945, to her list of D-Day casualties. She had to verify that each fallen soldier's division had actually landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944. Many soldiers were still fighting in Europe and the Pacific in 1945, meaning their deaths were unrelated to the Normandy invasion. This made the task more challenging, requiring constant cross-referencing. Though experts acknowledge that her list is not fully complete, they agree it remains the most accurate tally of D-Day casualties available. The first Allied cemetery in Europe was established on June 8, 1944, just 2 days after the D-Day landings. Located near the Normandy beaches, this cemetery became a sacred place, ensuring that the fallen soldiers were not just remembered as nameless casualties of war, but as individuals who had given everything for the cause of freedom. Today, the Normandy American Cemetery stands as a somber reminder of the cost of war, with row after row of white crosses marking the graves of the dead. The National D-Day Memorial in Bedford, Virginia, also plays a significant role in commemorating the sacrifices of D-Day. Bedford was chosen as the site because it suffered the highest per capita loss of U.S. soldiers on D-Day, with 19 young men from the small town losing their lives during the landings. The memorial honors each of the 4,414 Allied troops who died on D-Day, their names etched into bronze plaques as a permanent reminder of their courage. On the other side, the German forces defending the beaches also suffered heavy losses. Estimates of German casualties on D-Day range from 4,000 to 9,000, including those killed, wounded, or missing. Many of these soldiers are now buried at the Lecam German Military Cemetery in Normandy, a site that serves as a reminder of the war's devastation on both sides. In addition to their losses, the Germans faced the capture of tens of thousands of soldiers. By the end of the Normandy campaign, the Allies had taken approximately 200,000 German prisoners of war. One of the lesser discussed aspects of D-Day is the aftermath. What happened to the bodies of those who fell on the beaches and battlefields? The grim aftermath of D-Day. On D-Day, the brutality of the Normandy invasion left the beaches littered with the dead. Amidst the chaotic struggle for control of the coastline, fallen soldiers often lay untouched, their bodies becoming silent witnesses to the intense battle. With the first wave of troops focused entirely on securing a foothold, little attention could be spared for those who had given their lives in the initial assault. One of the most touching images of this aftermath is a photograph of Second Lieutenant Walter Sidlowski kneeling beside a draped body on Omaha Beach. While this photograph may seem to capture the immediate aftermath of the landings, it was actually taken the day after, on June 7th, a stark reminder that even in war, tending to the dead was sometimes delayed. Survivors from D-Day recall scenes that were as haunting as they were heartbreaking. Bodies bobbed in the surf, some washed ashore by the tide, while others lay strewn across the beach where they had fallen. In many areas, the number of fallen soldiers was so overwhelming that those landing in subsequent waves had to step over their comrades to advance. The sight of fallen soldiers, some still in their landing gear, served as a grim reminder of the scale and intensity of the invasion. The horrific sights faced by the soldiers who landed later were not just physical obstacles, but emotional and psychological ones as well, as they moved forward under constant fire, with the ever-present specter of death surrounding them. Artist Manuel Bromberg, who arrived 3 days after the invasion, documented the ongoing effort to bury the fallen through a series of sketches. His drawings depict soldiers being buried right on the beach, a task that was often carried out by German prisoners of war. The burials were hurried but respectful, as the soldiers knew they had to move quickly to keep the tide from reclaiming the bodies. Despite the chaos, the importance of properly laying to rest those who had made the ultimate sacrifice was never forgotten. While the beaches were ground zero for the invasion, the English Channel was a scene of frantic activity as well. Ships played a critical role, not just as platforms to launch the invasion, but also as return points for the wounded and the dead. Naval Intercept Officer Robert E. Davenport, stationed on the USS Henrico, had a front-row view of the invasion. From the deck, he watched smaller landing craft making their way toward Omaha Beach, full of soldiers brimming with anticipation and fear. But as these boats returned, the horrors they carried became evident. Some came back with soldiers who had been gunned down before they even reached the shore, while others held those who had drowned after disembarking too early due to a deceptive sandbar, wading into deep water under enemy fire. One of Davenport's most chilling memories was the sight of landing boats opening their ramps upon their return to the ship. The seawater inside, tinted red from the blood of fallen soldiers, spilled out a visual testament to the violence they had just endured. The tide, too, played a role in the grim reality of that day. In a cruel twist of nature, the sea sometimes washed the bodies of soldiers back onto the shore they had fought so valiantly to secure. It was a constant reminder that while the battle moved inland, the cost of securing that beachhead was still being counted. As Allied forces gained ground beyond the beaches and deeper into Normandy, they left behind a grisly scene. The beaches they had stormed were now graveyards, with thousands of bodies scattered across the sands and nearby fields. For the advancing troops, leaving their fallen comrades behind was not an option. It was not only a matter of respect and duty, but also a necessity to maintain morale. The fallen had to be buried, and quickly. Temporary burial sites began to appear along the coastline as the front moved forward. One of these makeshift cemeteries was organized by Sergeant Elbert E. Lee, who, despite limited resources, managed to provide a degree of dignity to the fallen. With materials in short supply, sections of wooden crates were repurposed as grave markers. Parachutes left behind by paratroopers were used to cover the bodies, adding a poignant touch of honor and respect in the face of overwhelming loss. Private Thomas J. Dowling, who was involved in the burial efforts, recalled the urgency and harsh conditions under which they worked. The warm June weather hastened the decomposition of the bodies, creating an added pressure to complete the burials quickly. Dowling and his fellow soldiers labored tirelessly, transporting the dead from the beaches and battlefields to the makeshift cemeteries using trailers. These grim convoys became a somber symbol of the battle's toll, a reminder that even as the fighting continued, there was still a battle between life and death being waged. By June 10th, just 4 days after the invasion, 8 temporary cemeteries had been established. Within a month, these sites held the remains of over 30,000 soldiers. It was a staggering number, but it was only the beginning of the losses that would be sustained as the Allies pushed deeper into occupied Europe. The challenge of identification. The task of ensuring that each fallen soldier was properly laid to rest fell to a special group known as the Quartermaster Graves Registration Service. This unit was responsible for locating, identifying, and burying the dead, ensuring that no soldier was left behind. Despite the immense challenges they faced, the soldiers tasked with these somber duties understood just how vital their work was. Identifying the deceased was a difficult and often heartbreaking task. Soldiers who wore uniforms with visible insignia could be recognized easily, but those who did not presented a much greater challenge. The teams responsible for finding and identifying the bodies had to dig deep to match the remains with their rightful names. They relied on various personal items like driver's licenses, heartfelt letters, clothing, and even biometric data such as fingerprints and dental records to make accurate identifications. Many remains were recovered from muddy swamps or entangled in the wreckage of ships. With no access to laundry facilities or clean uniforms, it was not uncommon for these brave soldiers to work while stained with the blood of their friends. Furthermore, as German troops retreated, they often left behind explosives set to detonate near the bodies, making the recovery efforts not only heartbreaking, but also extremely dangerous. Under these grim conditions, some remains could never be located. Nonetheless, the process of bringing the fallen home to their families lasted for years, casting a long shadow of grief on those who lost loved ones during D-Day. In military parlance, a specific type of identification used for soldiers is known as a dog tag. These tags serve a crucial purpose. They identify the dead. Each tag contains important information about the individual, including their name, identification number, blood type, and vaccination records. Many also indicate the soldier's religious preferences. Dog tags are typically made from rust-resistant metal to withstand the elements. Usually, there are two copies of the same information. One tag can be a single piece that splits into two or consist of two identical tags connected by a chain. The design is intentional, allowing one half of the tag to be removed from a fallen soldier for notification purposes, while the other half remains with the body when circumstances prevent immediate recovery. The term dog tag was coined because they resemble the tags used for identifying pets. The solemnity of this process, combined with the historical significance of the sacrifices made on D-Day, serves as a powerful reminder of the bravery of those who fought. The memories of their actions live on, woven into the fabric of history, ensuring that their sacrifices are never forgotten. From battlefields to resting places. Today, the landscape around Normandy is marked by 27 military cemeteries, each one a solemn reminder of the sacrifices made during the war. According to the Bayeux Museum, these cemeteries serve as final resting places for soldiers from both the Allied and Axis forces, housing nearly 130 graves in total. Among them, the Normandy American Cemetery holds a special place, not only due to its deep historical importance, but also because of its depiction in popular culture, particularly in Steven Spielberg's iconic 1998 film Saving Private Ryan. Nestled in Colleville-sur-Mer, this cemetery is carefully tended, with neat rows of white headstones that stretch across the rolling hills, marking the graves of 9,387 American soldiers. The cemetery also features a poignant garden of the missing, dedicated to 1,557 service members whose bodies were never found. This beautiful garden serves as a powerful reminder of their sacrifice, ensuring that they are honored even in the absence of a physical grave to visit. The journey to bring home the remains of D-Day soldiers was a long and complicated one. For families yearning to have their loved ones returned, the process of repatriation was filled with challenges. Following World War I, the US government had gained experience in returning soldiers' remains, but by the time World War II arrived, the military found itself overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the task. No soldiers' remains were sent home until all fighting ended in 1945, marking just the start of a complex operation that would stretch across continents from the battle-scarred fields of Normandy to distant islands in the Pacific. Many of these brave soldiers had been carefully recorded and buried by graves registration personnel, while others were laid to rest quickly during the heat of battle by their fellow comrades, or had gone missing in remote areas, complicating efforts to find and bring them home. The logistical hurdles involved in repatriating so many fallen heroes were enormous, demanding significant coordination and resources. It wasn't until 1946 that Congress intervened by passing the Return of the Dead program, which allocated an impressive $992.5 million for this effort. In today's dollars, that amount would be equivalent to over $1.4 billion. The journey was not without its delays. Strikes in key industries, including steel and coal, slowed down the production of caskets, which were vital for transporting the remains. It wasn't until late 1947 that the First World War II deceased were finally returned to American soil. This marked the beginning of a long and heartfelt process that would continue for years. By the time the program concluded in 1951, over 171,000 bodies had been successfully brought back home, allowing families to finally hold meaningful burials and memorials for their loved ones. This massive operation was not just a logistical endeavor. It was an emotional journey for families who had waited patiently for years to find closure and honor their fallen heroes. As we reflect on the courage and sacrifice of those who gave everything on D-Day, how can we ensure their legacy continues to inspire future generations? Let us know your opinion in the comments below.